We've had several lines come through as well. How is this time different?
This time, I think that the big difference is that Gina Raimondo, unlike the previous people who've come, like Blinken, for example, she has a dual mandate in a sense. She's here to both promote U.S. trade, and she's also here to explain to the Chinese why she's restricting U.S. trade. So obviously the U.S. or U.S. companies want to be able to trade with China. Companies like Boeing want to be able to sell their planes to China again. U.S. wants to export more to China. At the same time, she's here trying to explain to the Chinese government that U.S. restrictions on exports of things like machines to make semiconductors are not negotiable, but also trying to convince them that this is not an attempt to hinder the rise of China or to contain China. And so she has a really difficult sort of road that she has to walk here. I think what's different about it is there is actually a lot of areas where U.S. and China do cooperate. There is a lot of bilateral trade, and it is in the interest of both countries to have that continue. So there is a lot of benefits that she can talk about, unlike the previous visits, say with Blinken, where it was much more just about the controversies and not about the benefits.
And that's a good starting point then. James, how do we then measure tangible progress? Put that into context for us for this particular trip.
I mean, I think it's likely that she's going to walk away with some kind of announceable on trade. If you look at the previous history of negotiations, both with the both with the U.S., but also with the Europeans, often after or around the time of these kind of meetings, there's often an announcement of a Chinese airline or a number of Chinese airlines buying planes, for example. And so the government in China is very, very good at using its control of the commercial industry, the state-owned enterprises, to bring some kind of trade good or trade sale that their counterpart, in this case Gina Raimondo, can then take home and say, look, this is what I've achieved. So I think you should definitely expect to see some kind of announcements on some kind of improved export market access for U.S. companies. At the same time, it's going to be very hard for her to convince, as I said, the Chinese that they're not trying to contain China. If you look at the deal that was just done with Japan and South Korea, it looks very much like an effort to contain China, and it's really hard to convince them otherwise.